You are listening to Middle East Monitor Conversations, bringing you lively discussions with prominent voices from the region and beyond, as we delve deeper into issues shaping the Middle East and North Africa, from politics, the culture, and the arts.
Hello, welcome to MEMO Conversations. I'm video producer Osman Butt. India completed its nearly 2-month election process in which 969 million people were eligible to vote. Where incumbent Prime Minister Narendra Modi won a third term, his BJP party lost a significant amount of its vote, and they were forced into a coalition government. Modi's brand of politics has often been described as popularist, right-wing, Hindu nationalist, anti-secular, and Islamophobic. While many have classed the BJP as a break from India's secular liberal political tradition, is that really true? What role does Hinduism, Islam, and Islamophobia play in India's political formation, politics, and how it has evolved? How has globalization impacted it, and how does it compare to elsewhere? We aim to explore these topics with our guest today, Jocelyne Cesari. Jocelyne, welcome to MEMO Conversations.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Jocelyne holds a chair of religion and politics at the University of Birmingham and is a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs at Georgetown University. Since 2018, she is the T.J. Dermont Dunphy Visiting Professor of Religion, Violence and Peace Building at Harvard Divinity School. President-elect of the European Academy of Religion, her work on religion and politics has garnered recognition and awards. The 2020 Distinguished Scholar of Religion section of the International Studies Association, Distinguished Fellow of the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs, and the Royal Society of Arts in the United Kingdom. Her new book, We God Nations, Political Christianity, Islam and Hinduism in the World of Nations, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. In 2023, the Book Award for the Scientific Society Award for the Study of Religion. Other publications include What is Political Islam? Reina 2018 Book Award 2019 of Religious Section at ISA, Islam and Gender and Democracy in Comparative Perspective, and The Awakening of Muslim Religion, Modernity and the State, CUP 2014. She is an academic and advisor to the Euro Islam Info. That's quite a bio you've got there. It's you seem like the perfect person to have this conversation with, and we're very pleased to have you. So to sort of get us started, perhaps you can sort of, if we can go back quite a way to what got you interested in these sorts of questions. I mean, you deal a lot with religion in politics. You've dealt a lot with Islam, political Islam and Islamophobia globally, and now obviously India. I'm sort of wondering if you could take us back, though. What got you interested into the very question of religion in politics to begin with?
It started at my master's degree that I got in France. And at the time, looking at religion and politics was quite obvious while we were studying political science. So it's quite a unique situation because most of our professors started their career in Algeria, so in what was the former colonial empire. And for them, looking at politics, not automatically, but included a big deal on, looking at religion as well, which is, I realized later, especially moving into the Anglo-American academia, that this is not a given. And so I was trained very early on looking at religion and politics simultaneously, how the two either come together or clash. And then I did my PhD on the formation of Islam as a religious minority in France, and also looking at Algeria, because the link with Algeria was quite strong at the time for the people who were settling down and becoming citizens of France. So there has always been, for me, religion and politics and minority and majority condition, and Islam has been the core of this work. Also, for me, branching out, expanding has been very important, because I do not want to give the illusion that religion and politics concern only Islam. That is far from reflecting the reality. So in my last work, I have opened up to Hinduism, Orthodoxy, Catholicism, to show that the same challenges are present in all the other traditions, but with different outcomes. So that is, in a nutshell, the the reason of my interest for religion and politics. So, yeah.
So how does, because thinking about this from the perspective of you who come from France and you've studied this within the French context, religion and politics, within the sort of context of political science study within France itself, how is, the study of religion sort of treated and greeted in the sort of wider political science sphere within France?
It has always been present, unfortunately, and that's why I have deliberately tried to step away from this focus on Islam. In the case of political science, it has remained focused on Islam. So one of the big work I'm trying to do is to reconnect the investigation of Islam to the broader field of anthropology and sociology of religion. Because when this has not been done yet, the political scientists are looking at Islam, and that's a religion, so they are interested in the religious aspect, but they never connect to the big body of knowledge of religious studies that could apply to Islam, and that they don't do this. And that's, I think, very important, not only academically, but also politically, because if you don't do that, you involuntarily reinforce the narrative that Islam is unique. Islam is specific in the challenges that concern religion and politics, but it's not unique. And so that's why with the Berkeley Center in particular, I've been working with scholars of Catholicism. Now we have a big project on the challenge of pluralism across religious tradition, meaning Catholicism, Protestantism, Judaism, Islam, Orthodoxy. So, and we are also going to look into Hinduism. So the goal is to say now that all religions are facing political issues, and it becomes counterproductive to only look at Islam. And from this perspective, I think that French political science is still behind. Yeah.
Yeah, so in that sense, do you feel the Anglosphere academia is more open to this challenge, or do you feel that it has a set of different challenges which makes it, difficult to sort of do these sorts of intersections and studies?
The challenge is different in the Anglo-American academia. The first one is for political scientists, religion didn't exist at all. It was not even thinkable to look at religion until 9/11. Of course, since then, things have changed. You could not find today anybody in the discipline telling you that religion doesn't matter. But how it matters is still not clarified, in the sense that nobody is looking at, indeed, the knowledge of religious studies to try to explain the role of religion in politics and vice versa. The political scientists have what I call the Huntington syndrome, which means that Huntington was right to look at religion, civilization, values, to try to understand conflict. The problem is he didn't know what civilization meant, because he was not educated in understanding civilization. So he used his own common sense, like, with a series of cliches on each tradition to try to explain the role of religion in politics. And that's what I keep telling my students in government. If you are not educated in religion, you cannot rely on your own experience to understand it. You are trained to do public policy. If you do religion and politics, you have at least to take into account that there is a discipline on religious study that you could look into and benefit from. And I have to say that this is a big challenge, because despite the whole buzz on interdisciplinarity, the track, especially in doctoral studies, remain very, very monodisciplinary.
Indeed. And could you perhaps talk to us about, you mentioned obviously that there's this tendency as well to sort of see in many ways Islam as unique. Islam as unique within, certain contexts in terms of the challenges it presents, the fact that it has, it's perceived to have a certain kind of politics, which, may be a challenge to sort of hegemony of, say, liberal order or the Western order or whatever it is. But why has this sort of idea emerged to begin with? Is it solely to do with things like post 9/11 fallout and needing a new enemy? Is it demographic? Is it the fact that so many Muslims live in Europe and other parts of the West? Why has this emerged as an idea that there's something particular about Islam that is a problem?
So again, if we go back to Huntington, and if you look at statistics, you will see that the Muslim majority countries rank very high in conflict, not only interstate, but intra-national conflict that deal with politics and that are very bloody when it comes to tension between different religious groups. So the tendency from there is to say it's because of Islam. And in my work, I have tried to show that it is not about Islam as a tradition, because at different moment in history, Christianity could also be considered as pretty violent. If you look at the colonization of Latin America, the complete destruction of all the local population, including in North America and in the country in which I live. If you look at Inquisition, if you look at all the war that happened in Europe, you cannot say that Christianity is, resistant or not affected by political violence. So how do you look then at the role of religion in politics? The first thing is to say that the role of religion, like any other factor, can be either positive or negative. And instead of focusing only on the negative, we should also look at the positive. We have lots of studies, especially among Muslims in Europe and religious minorities in Europe, that show that religion is a factor of positive integration or positive factor of integration in most of European societies. But this is far from being the perception of Islam. The reason for this hostility or skepticism is the fact that religion, as I said, Islam is seen today as a religion that is the most involved in violent action across the world and across different countries. So this is causing a sort of focus on Islam. And because the actors, the political actors themselves say that they do this in the name of Islam, it does reinforce this idea. And that's also what I keep saying. And this is true also for policymakers. Do not take at face value what political actors are saying, We do this for political actors that use Christianity, for example. There is a lot of skepticism when Donald Trump talks about Christianity, but there is not an equivalent skepticism when some political actors in Muslim countries talk about Islam, So, and I think it's because of the lack of familiarity with what the Islamic tradition is. The third reason that is more deep down in our, I would say, mindset or psyche in the West is what historians have shown, that our Western understanding of modernity had been historically built against, you always build yourself against another. And in the case of Europe, it was the Ottoman Empire. So you have lots of terms, for example, the term despotism, that is often associated with Muslim majority countries. Actually, Montesquieu, the big French philosopher looking at constitutional order, what I call our French law. Okay. So he said that he depicted ideal constitutional order and said that it was against despotism as it was happening in the Ottoman Empire. But this was not the reality. The Ottoman Empire at the time was a very sophisticated, nuanced, pluralist political system. It was far from being despotic. But he could not say that because he would have ended up in jail if he had attacked frontally in a very direct fashion the French monarchy. Same thing with fanaticism. The West has created first a false image of Islam as Mahometism, like in a sort of parallel to Christianity, and associated it with fanaticism. You know, Voltaire, again, another French philosopher, wrote a play, not a good one, but it was the Prophet Muhammad or the spirit of fanaticism. So you see how terms can be dormant in our psyche and can be reactivated by contemporary issues. And so that is this kind of also deep down conception that we Western, modern civilization have been built against Islam, that is still very present in a lot of the contemporary or existing discourse on incompatibility of Islam with democracy, with human rights, and so on.
That's kind of interesting. I think that will get us on to India now, because of course there is something, we talk a lot about political formations in the West. We talk a lot about politics of Islamophobia in the West, which is quite important, but it is also happening elsewhere in different contexts for different reasons. But before we sort of get to the idea of Islamophobia in contemporary India, Modi's India, could you perhaps tell us a little about Hindu identity and its functionality in India today?
So, as we know, or it's often said that India is a secular country by its constitution and political system since independence. And that is true constitutionally. But it doesn't mean that Hinduism never played a role even at the peak of the secular public culture. So what do I mean by that? I mean that first, it's not even an homogeneous country. It's like a subcontinent on its own. So you have a centralized institutional mechanism that guarantees secularity, which in India is not separation. It is not either the English model of the Anglican Church with the head, with the Queen or the King now being the head of it. It's what is called equidistance. The state stands or try to stand at equidistance with all religion and providing all religion with the same resources. But this is a centralized level. At the level of localities, the reality is that religion have always played a role in defining identities, economic mobilization, social positioning, including the caste system. Even if the caste system was abolished, the boundaries are still there. So what happened is that in the face of also not only building secularity or secular institutions, India is also to build a national narrative that had to do several things, guarantee or make sure that all religion are protected, but that also all ethnic and linguistic communities are protected. And it was a time until colonization where the primary identity factor was the local one. And the local one was always diverse. You had Sikh, Hindu, Muslims, and of course, everybody knew that they belonged to different religious communities, but something was bringing them together, which is the local culture, either by stories, by customs, by food. You know, all this was creating the sort of, we are from Gujarati, we are from, you know, that was a sense of local identification. And the religion was nested within. I cannot go in detail, but what happened with colonization and then with the nation state is that instead of maintaining this local diversity, the nation building is an homogeneous process, homogenization process. So what happened, and even with Gandhi, that is presented as the father, and he was really insisting on pluralism. But for him, pluralism was plurality of religion. It was not plurality of cultures. So he pushed to the recognition of different institutions, top down, of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and this destroyed the autonomy of the local communities. And the other big mistake that explains why Hinduism has become such an homogeneous factor is that at the time of the constitutional debate, Ambedkar said we should recognize the secular classes as an independent group. And all the seculars said no. They are part of Hinduism. While this was not completely true, you had also Muslims, part of some of the secluded classes. So this is how you created this homogeneous group. And that's why today, Modi is tapping into the most marginalized or low-ranking element of Hindu groups. And because these groups do not have any more channel of identification outside of being Hindu in the nation. And this homogenization of Hinduism was also part of the colonization process. Hinduism never existed as a set of coherent, national doctrine or behaviors. Even governors, the British governor was saying what is called Hinduism in this locality is not the same in this other. And again, that's homogenization that creates a sense of unity among Hindus that could have been divided by locality, by class, and this was not possible anymore. And also by the fact that the people who built the country were Hindu elite. They were secular, but they were Hindu elite. And so their vocabulary, their way of talking about India as an independent country was very much influenced by Hinduism. You know, there is in the book you mentioned, or We Got People, where I have a chapter on India, and the breaking point for the Muslim elite was right after the independence, when the children were going to school, they were greeted by sort of introduction that was coming from the Hindu tradition. And they said, this is not possible. We are not welcome here. And that's how they left and built Pakistan. So you see, it's impossible to tell you Hinduism is this in the past, before nation, and it has evolved. Actually, Hinduism, as we know it, is a construction of the modern state from different practice. So Modi is not a figure of authentic Hindu tradition. He is the heir of this building of Hinduism to fit into the national frame.
Indeed, indeed. And I think part of that construction that we've talked about is this idea of indigenous religion versus foreign religion. So even within, let's say, the 1940s, when we're talking about these elites, there was an idea that, Hinduism, as they sort of conceived it, was a local Indian religion, and Islam was the outsider religion. Even if they were to be tolerated, they're still sort of seen as a kind of guest religion within the context of India. And so I think this is a good way to sort of start talking about the role of Islam in India, but particularly, post partition, and then as we sort of get to Modi's India, how Islam became the politics of othering of Islam and how it's changed over the last number of years.
First, even before Modi, you have a lots of tension locally. There is unfortunately a long history of riots locally that involved Muslim, but other group, Hindu Muslims or other group like Sikhs or others. And you see peaks in the riots, and in the local communal tension. What happened with Modi is that he had the capacity to mobilize at the national level a lot of movements that had been promoting this idea that India is Hindu since the 1920s. So it's not a new phenomenon. The group that is coming from is a very intolerant group that was already existing, but that was in some way hidden by the national elite, like Gandhi, like the Nehrus. But even if this was present, it didn't become visible at the national level, but it was there. And so Modi benefited from that and was able to build the BJP by the support of these groups. And so the idea that India is Hindu, is not new. What is new is the capacity of Modi to erode the secular system to push toward an implementation of India being Hindu. And this is very worrisome. It started before COVID. You had already before COVID lots of groups that were, and political actors locally were violently and very vocally anti-Muslim and Islam. You had already examples of abuse by the population. The turning point in intensification was the COVID, because we witnessed at the time a huge amount of abuse, Muslims being barred from hospital because they were considered or seen as conveying the virus, all their business destroyed. So, and since then, this has just been, augmenting, increasing at a very high pace. You have lynching happening. And the worrisome part is that the local police force are not very much implementing the rule of law. And that's the problem. So with Modi at the head of the system, the rule of law that is supposedly protecting all citizens is not implemented anymore. He has also pushed for his main point, especially not at this election, but the one before that he won with a big majority. He used to say that the secular culture was protecting the minorities, but not the Hindu, because he is addressing the fact that not only the state has to guarantee the same resources to everybody, but there is the idea that it's not just an abstract equality. Some groups need to be helped more than others. And it was indeed translated into a state policy. So he said, this is not possible anymore. We have now to just take care of our Hindu group. And so what we are witnessing here is something that is very, very severe, which means a social discrimination, meaning Hindu citizens attacking Muslim citizens, And you have also what we call a governmental discrimination, meaning the state now not taking all the measures to either make people accountable for their abuses or even for preventing them. And when you have these two levels combined, governmental and societal discrimination, the status of people is very, very vulnerable and very much at risk.
Yes, it's interesting because obviously state institutions are sort of doing some of these things as well. But what's always struck me about Modi's India and something you mentioned earlier is that in a way, the way a lot of this discrimination, this violence happens is very much at the local level. And it's done through a net, because I think one of the more interesting things about the BJP and Modi is that they rely a lot on networks. So the BJP has networks with the RSSS,
yes, that's the
RSSS.
group I was mentioning. I didn't want to overload your audience with terms and the abbreviation, but that's the group, yes.
And the RSS themselves have other networks that they're connected to, and across the country, local Hindu networks, which are charities. They can be NGOs, they can be, what effectively could be called militia groups. There's all sorts of things happening across India, and the BJP through the RSS as well has built connections between all of them across different parts of the country, and at the local level, which is and with BJP being ahead at their national level as well, it's given them this sort of ability to sort of influence all these different actors in different countries, different places within India. And you sort of see, even during the election, you will see a BJP candidate in one area giving completely different messaging, different policy ideas, and, claiming that Modi's interested in implementing these things. And then in a different area, it will say something completely different because the local politics is completely different. And they sort of get away with this, what to us would be a kind of contradiction. If, when a Western politician, if Biden gets up and says one thing and then a Democrat running somewhere else says something completely different, it sort of backfires on them. But this doesn't seem to happen in the Indian context.
No, it doesn't happen for the reason I mentioned before. It's because there is no, I would say, clear, or how to say, it's not just top down, it's also bottom up. Yeah, and even the past more educated elite, secular elite used to rely on these local alliances and network, but they just didn't mention them or work with them at the national level. What Modi did in order to build his own political strength was to build some of this network to create the BJP. Without, as you said, the RSS still exists, but built on the support and other networking, he was able to pull up the BJP as a voice representing these local tensions. And again, the tensions are not everywhere. They are states or localities that are more prone or inclined to this tension than others. And indeed, according to the majority, let's say if there is a case of more Muslim people in this locality, the BJP will also be more, I would say, cautious, or the representative of the BJP will be more cautious in the way of dealing with some of the issues, So there are lots of local variables that, unfortunately, from an outsider perspective, and especially when you do media, you think that, on top it's the same that on the bottom. But in the case of India, particularly, that is not true.
Yes, interesting. And I sort of now want to, what I sort of wonder about as well, because whenever we sort of see this kind of politics emerging in different countries throughout the world, a leader emerges and they're sort of the spokesman of this identity, not necessarily new identity, but of the identity. And they have clear outgroups who they target. So in this case, it would be Muslims, but there's also a targeting against other people from within that identity group who do not identify with that kind of politics. So my question is, how is this sort of identity that has emerged in this in with the BJP directed against other Hindus? How does it function on that kind of level?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, you are saying what we are witnessing is, it's, as you said, it's populist. So it is not well received when some of segment of Hindu population are criticizing this kind of politics because it's seen as a betrayal of the Hindu people. And it can go with some pressure. So I have feedback from lots of friends that are telling me that it's difficult to object or to criticize this kind of politics locally. So either people are silent, and their silence is in some way a sort of validation of the more extreme or intolerant behaviors. And there can be a repercussion, like, pressure on people locally. So what we are witnessing is a sort of silencing of the segment of Hindu groups who do not approve. And again, this is another sign, worrisome sign of not only the erosion of secularity, but of erosion of democracy.
Indeed. And the concerns that you've heard, are they from, let's say, when you say at the local level, are they from, Hindu pressure groups within those local communities that they're worried about? Is it the state institutions themselves, such as the police, security services, or local government? Who are they sort of worried about this pressure coming from?
You mean the one who
the one who's being silent, who told you they're feeling?
Most of the time it's I would say, I don't know what middle class really means in the case of India, but it's people who used to be, in favor of the Congress, the party of the Congress, where, were more secular, actually. That is also part of the problem. They do not carry this popular religiosity that Modi has made central in his way of being Indian, and that's I think also part of the problem, because it looks also, and we are witnessing the same issues in America. Religion has moved only on one side, the side of intolerance in some ways. And so they are not talking much about religion or Hinduism. And that's also part of the issue, because it just puts Hinduism as the topic of the Hindutva, which is dangerous in itself. It's like in America, when you hear the one who talk about Christianity in public space are the one who want a Christian America, while we know that there are lots of Christians who are also, who define themselves as Christian, but do not want a Christian America. So that's the same kind of unbalance here.
And so we've talked a lot about how, this sort of identity emerged through colonization, the Hindu, a new kind of Hindu identity within India, and has been, expanded by the rise of the nation state and its institutions, and also developed further as time has gone on through Modi. But I'm wondering what role globalization has played as well in not only the development of Hindu identity, but the manifestation of Islamophobic politics, even at the local level, because all of this happens within the global context as well. Local is global.
Absolutely.
There's clear influences of the war on terror. So could you talk to us about the role globalization plays?
Yeah, that is what I call in my work the securitization of Islam. And this, we see it happening in Europe, in China, in India, even in Muslim majority countries, where the global environment will be used to suppress some groups or position in the regional context. So what does it mean? It means that the terror threat is there. Nobody would say it's not there, and you live in Europe. I am from Europe. We have been, unfortunately, it's the theater of lots of attacks. So no doubt there. What happened is that since 9/11, government have justified, and also not only in Europe, but also in America, they have justified politics or policies that are infringing on civil rights and for Muslims on religious freedom in the name of security. And they usually present it as exceptional, but we know that they last and they remain. So what we have witnessed everywhere is an erosion of the religious freedom of Muslims, most of the time justified by security issues, in the sense that if you look more observant and if you dress in a certain way, and that's how the hijab, but also the niqab has become such an object of discussion, because it's associated not only with a religious behavior, but also with a political stand that is usually seen as anti-Western and violent. So you have policies to control mosques, to control the training of imams, to control the practices of people at different level. And we have statistics since 9/11, the involvement in interference of European state in religion has grown exponentially. And the first group that is targeted is Islam everywhere. But what people don't realize is all religions then are also concerned, because once you start eroding religious freedom, it's very hard to say, you know, I'm going to make an exception for this as a group. We had the case in France in 2004. We had this law prohibiting religious signs in public space. So even if the hijab was not mentioned, the target was the hijab. What happened? You have Sikh families. So they came to the authorities and they said, what happened with our boys wearing the turban? And they say, sorry, you are under the same law. So you see, it's not that it's sought to affect everybody, but the consequences of it are there. And so under securitization, and that's why it's justified. The authorities are saying we need these measures to make sure we are safe. And that's how also they are accepted by the majority of the population. And for authoritarian regimes, this has been a big asset, because Modi has used it to explain erosion of rights of Muslims, saying that he is protecting also the country against extreme group. Russia has done the same, you know, about repressing the Chechnya opposition, even before 9/11, saying these are a threat to the security of the country. China is doing the same with the Uyghur and the repression of the Muslim in the Xinjiang province. So that is indeed another element that plays in favor of authoritarianism and of, unfortunately, the rise of Islamophobia. And again, you do not have much pushback from the population because you know, it's done for the security of everybody.
Indeed. And, you know, and obviously at the sort of local level as well, it's sort of, it's also a question of, well, what benefit would there be if you're, you know, someone in this country to even speak out when, you know, you've got other things going on in life? Why spend time speaking out against these sorts of issues? Yeah,
exactly. It's a sense of prioritization of, sense of, because political actors are very efficient at giving you a sense of emergency, of it's needed now, you know. So, and when you don't have all the information, it's very easy to accept it.
So what do you think is going to be the future of India? What direction do you see it moving in the sort of near to medium term future in regards to all of the things that we've just discussed?
Unfortunately, what I'm seeing is an erosion of the secular institution, as we discussed, the possible turn toward authoritarianism. It happens a lot when you have a charismatic leader who is surrounded by a lots of not only respect, but I would say devotion. We have seen that with Erdogan in Turkey, the shift. In the beginning, the AKP regime was, and Turkey was considered an emergent democracy, and then Erdogan took a very authoritarian turn in 2012, and it has not stopped since then. So it can also happen in India. What worries me the most is the very, very violent situation, the huge violence against Muslims in India, and who is really addressing this problem, and as we said, the opposition has been pretty much weak concerning this situation. So I'm sorry, I don't sound very optimistic right there. Yeah.
And so when it comes to sort of, scholars studying perhaps now or perhaps in the future studying, the phenomena of religion as a basis of nation, religious nationalism, popularism and religion, what do you see as the sort of the questions that are now being asked about that, and where do you see the research going?
The research go in two different ways. What is very striking in the use of religion and nationalism is the question of gender everywhere, by Modi, Erdogan, Trump, Putin, just to mention a few. There is a lot of focus on gender and women being seen as the pillar of the moral, virtuous nation. So, and religion and a certain interpretation of religion serving this narrative. So what I'm witnessing everywhere is the attempt of mobilizing as a group within each religion to counter the use of religion on just one side, because this is not democratic. The democracy is the capacity of having religious voices distributed across the political spectrum. What is worrying, it's not that religion on its own, that's not religion on its own. It's the fact that religion is seen associated with one side, and usually the conservative authoritarian side. The paradox is we have a lot of surveys that show that the most observant, pious member of each tradition are usually against this use of religion. Now, how do we give them channel to express their rejection of this authoritarian use of their religion? That's a big question. That's what we are trying to look into. How do we to open up more paths, not only to survey, but also political engagement, to avoid the push of religion only on one side. And again, it's not only Islam right there. You see, you cannot just say it's Islam. It's Protestantism, it's Orthodoxy. You see it everywhere. That's one big thing. The second, I think, important path to research is to see if there is a possibility for more mobilization or communication from the bottom, from the different segment of population toward the top, meaning the populist voice is fueled because a lot of citizens think that the current political elite doesn't reflect their needs and expectation. And so in itself, this is a democratic claim, if you think of it. It's like we want the people, to be more represented. The problem we are having now is that this kind of expectation is channeled into authoritarian and anti-democratic agendas and mobilization. How do you keep this need for more opening, for more power sharing, without destroying the existing system? This is also a big question, because some people, the jury is out among scholars. Is populism automatically against democracy? From what I see, it is because people are dreaming of a sort of empowerment of the people that they turn to these extreme right groups. So there is more work to be done around this question of populism and democracy, and again associated also with the role of religion in it.
So indeed, those who are not sort of engaged in the sort of populist authoritarian side of religion need to start taking religion more seriously as a force and thinking about ways it can be utilized.
Exactly. That is the problem, that the more democratic voice today are also seen as the most anti-religious voices, which is a big issue right there, especially in Western democracies. So that is something that is a responsibility of the elite, including the elite we train. And this, circling back to the beginning on, how you teach about politics. Most of the time, when you teach about politics, you ignore religion.
Jocelyne Cesari, thank you for talking to us at MEMO Conversation.
Thank you very much. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
To our audience, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to catch up with this one or previous MEMO Conversations, you can go to our website, but please do tune in next time for more MEMO Conversations.
This was Middle East Monitor Conversations, brought to you by the Middle East Monitor in London.